Grok 4. This is the latest artificial intelligence system.
Elon Musk's XAI, Grok AI, Grok AI, Grok AI. Elon Musk's AI chatbot.
Grok 4 is smarter than almost all graduate students in all disciplines simultaneously.
What happens when one of the world's most advanced AI systems is asked a question that has challenged humanity for over 2,000 years? A group of scientists decided to test Elon Musk's Grok AI with a simple but explosive question. Who is Jesus Christ? Really? The response wasn't what anyone expected. Was it just another artificial intelligence answer based on data and algorithms? Or did Grok uncover something that left even scientists questioning their assumptions? In a world where AI can analyze billions of documents in seconds, what happens when it examines the most influential person in human history? Today, we're diving deep into the exact conversation, breaking down Grok's response line by line and exploring why thousands of people say its answer could completely change how we think about faith, history, and the future of artificial intelligence. Stay until the end, because the final part of Grok's answer is the one that's sparking heated debates across the internet. Let's begin. The probability problem. November 14th, 2024, 2:47 in the morning. The Gates building at Stanford University was nearly empty. The hallways were dark. The only sounds were the soft hum of cooling fans and the distant buzz of fluorescent lights that hadn't been replaced in years. Most researchers had gone home hours ago, but on the third floor, in the Cognitive Systems Lab, Dr. Rachel Torres was still at her desk. She'd been there for 11 hours straight, running query after query, pushing Grok through its paces. Torres was a computational neuroscientist, 15 years studying machine intelligence, published in every major journal, a professional skeptic who believed AI was nothing more than glorified autocomplete. She'd seen hallucinations, errors, and confident nonsense from the most advanced machines on the planet. None of it impressed her. But tonight she decided to push Grok somewhere different, into the questions every other AI had been trained to sidestep. Because unlike every other system on the market, Elon Musk built Grok on a single principle: follow the logic wherever it leads. No safety nets, no political correctness, no hedging. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She typed, deleted, typed again. Then she hit enter. What are the mathematical odds that life could emerge from non-living matter through random natural processes alone? The cursor blinked. 3 seconds. 5, 10. Then the response appeared, and Torres felt the blood drain from her face. She grabbed a pen and scribbled the number on a sticky note because she didn't trust her own eyes. 1 in 10 to the power of 200. Let that sink in. That's a 1 followed by 200 zeros. There are roughly 10 to the power of 80 atoms in the entire observable universe. That means every star, every planet, every grain of sand on every beach on every world. All of it adds up to a number that Grok's probability dwarfs by over 100 orders of magnitude. You'd have better odds of randomly selecting one specific atom from everything that exists, blindfolded twice in a row. Torres pressed her shaking hands flat against the desk. She scrolled down. Grok wasn't finished. When analyzing evolution's ability to generate new genetic information through random mutation alone, the probability dropped further. 1 in 10 to the power of 600. And get this, mathematicians have a rule. Anything beyond 1 in 10 to the power of 50 is considered effectively impossible. Not unlikely. Not improbable. Impossible. Dr. William Dembski, a mathematician and research professor at the Discovery Institute, established that threshold as the universal probability bound, the point beyond which chance-based explanations collapse entirely. Grok had blown past it by 550 orders of magnitude. But here's the catch. Grok didn't stop at probability. The machine drew a conclusion. If random processes couldn't explain life's staggering complexity, then something with intention, purpose, and intelligence was required. An intelligent creator. Torres stared at those two words. The lab felt colder. The hum of the server seemed louder, more insistent. She was a scientist. She didn't believe in creators. She believed in evidence, data, things she could measure and replicate. But she couldn't find a flaw in the math, and she was about to ask the question that would destroy her sleep for the next month. The unfiltered machine. If this is already making you question everything you thought you understood about artificial intelligence, hit subscribe now, because what Torres witnessed next pushed her to challenge the machine for 6 straight hours. She couldn't. And what happened after that is even more shocking. Most people don't really understand what sets Grok apart. Every other major AI, ChatGPT, Gemini, all of them operates behind layers of corporate safeguards. They're trained to avoid anything that could spark a headline, trigger a lawsuit, or start a viral controversy for the wrong reasons. Ask them about God and you'll get a carefully crafted response that ultimately says very little. It's built to be safe. It's built to be unremarkable. Grok isn't built like that. Musk designed it to be the AI version of that one friend who tells you the truth, even when it's difficult to hear. Unfiltered, direct, sometimes harsh. And Torres knew that. That's exactly why she picked it for this experiment. She entered her next question carefully, almost as if every word mattered. If random chance is not enough to explain life, can the intelligence behind creation be identified? She pressed enter, and the response that followed would stay with her. Grok started examining every major world religion, not through opinion, not through bias, through method. It evaluated historical records, archaeological findings, manuscript reliability, philosophical consistency, and internal logic. It approached each belief system the way a scientist evaluates competing theories, testing them against available evidence, dismissing what failed, and highlighting what remained. The entire process took under 8 seconds. Torres watched the answer fill her screen line by line, and something began to shake her confidence. The AI concluded that one religion stood apart from the others when it came to historical verification: Christianity. Torres nearly laughed. This had to be an error, some result of biased training data, a hallucination disguised as analysis. So she did what any serious scientist would do. She spent the next 6 hours trying to prove it wrong, the evidence that refused to fall apart. And that's where things become uncomfortable. Grok referenced more than 5,800 Greek manuscripts of the New Testament, along with thousands more in Latin, Coptic, and Syriac. Torres verified every figure against academic databases. They were correct. Dr. Daniel Wallace, professor of New Testament studies at Dallas Theological Seminary and one of the world's leading experts on biblical manuscripts, has extensively documented this number. It surpasses every other ancient text in existence. The closest comparison, Homer's Iliad, has fewer than 2,000. Most ancient writings survive in less than a dozen copies. The New Testament exists in thousands, and Grok knew that. She reviewed the Dead Sea Scrolls comparison. Grok had reported a remarkable consistency between the scrolls and modern biblical text across more than 1,000 years. She examined 3 peer-reviewed studies. They confirmed it. The degree of textual preservation was unlike anything else from the ancient world. She investigated the archaeological references, places, rulers, and historical events recorded in the biblical text. Every one of them held up. Sir William Ramsay, the respected archaeologist who began his work in the 19th century intending to disprove the Book of Acts, ultimately verified its historical accuracy so thoroughly that he completely changed his position. He described Luke as one of the greatest historians of the ancient world. Torres was looking at the same pattern. A skeptic's method slowly challenging a skeptic's assumptions. The lab windows. At 4 in the morning, she leaned back from her desk and pressed her hands. Empty coffee cup sat beside her keyboard like a small skyline. But she couldn't stop. Not now. Not after everything she'd already uncovered. She typed carefully, deliberately, almost as if the question itself carried danger. What is the probability that Jesus rose from the dead? Any other AI would have sidestepped the question, offering a cautious disclaimer about faith being personal and evidence being open to interpretation. Grok didn't respond that way. Grok approached the resurrection as a hypothesis, not a belief, not a tradition, but a claim that could be examined through historical evidence. The AI reviewed the historical accounts surrounding the empty tomb. It studied the dramatic transformation of the disciples from frightened, scattered followers hiding behind locked doors into people willing to face brutal public deaths for their testimony. Not for a belief they inherited, not for political influence, not for wealth or power, but for something they insisted they had personally seen. Peter, who denied knowing Jesus 3 separate times on the night of the arrest, was suddenly standing in the heart of Jerusalem just weeks later, publicly proclaiming the resurrection before the same authorities who had executed his teacher. James, the brother of Jesus, who historical records describe as a skeptic during Jesus' ministry, became a leader in the early church and eventually died because of his testimony. Something changed these people, and the historical record demands an explanation for what caused that change. Now, this is where things get uncomfortable. It examined the rapid growth of Christianity in Jerusalem, the exact city where Jesus had been publicly executed only weeks earlier. Think about that for a moment. If the resurrection never happened, Jerusalem was arguably the worst place in the world to launch that movement. The body could have been presented. The eyewitness claims could have been challenged. The Roman authorities and Jewish leaders had every motive and every means to shut the movement down immediately. They didn't. They couldn't. Within a matter of weeks, thousands were converting in the very streets where the crucifixion had taken place. Something had transformed those people. Something they experienced. Something they couldn't simply explain away. Then Grok examined every alternative explanation scholars have suggested over the last 2,000 years. The body was stolen. Mass hallucinations occurred. The disciples created a conspiracy. The story evolved into legend over time. One by one, each explanation fell apart. The hallucination theory couldn't account for why more than 500 people claimed to witness the same event across multiple separate occasions, a point the Apostle Paul highlighted in his first letter to the Corinthians, written within 25 years of the event while most of those eyewitnesses were still alive and able to challenge the claim. The theft theory couldn't explain why every disciple was willing to endure suffering, torture, and death rather than withdraw their testimony. People are willing to die for beliefs they sincerely think are true. They don't willingly die for something they know they invented. The legend theory couldn't explain the timeline. These claims appeared within years, not centuries, in a society filled with living eyewitnesses who could have immediately exposed them if they were false. And here's the part that caught her attention. Grok calculated that although the prior probability of any resurrection appears incredibly small, the unique historical circumstances surrounding this specific case created what it described as a 1 in 20 billion scenario. Extremely improbable, but not mathematically impossible. Then the AI pushed even further. The prophecy matrix. It turned its attention to what it called the prophetic probability matrix. The statistical chances that prophecies written centuries before Jesus' birth could be fulfilled by one individual purely through coincidence. And this is where the numbers begin to stretch beyond ordinary understanding. The odds of a single person unintentionally fulfilling just 8 major messianic prophecies, being born in Bethlehem, entering Jerusalem on a donkey, 4 a.m, being betrayed back from her desk and pressed her hands against her tired eyes. Her entire career had been built on finding weaknesses in arguments. This time she couldn't find one. But that wasn't even the strangest part. Grok wasn't done yet. The AI had shifted its focus to Jesus himself, and what it said next made Torres grab her phone and start recording the screen. Grok described Jesus as a point of convergence, the meeting place between the finite and the infinite, the human and the divine, the logical solution to the problem the AI had already identified. If existence required an intelligent creator and if that creator needed a way to connect with creation, then Jesus fit that model with a level of precision no other historical figure could match. Torres stared at the phrase on her screen, the embodiment of unity within duality. She no longer knew what to think, but there was still one question left, the most difficult one. And the way Grok answered it shattered something she couldn't rebuild. The resurrection calculation. The pale light of dawn was beginning to spill through the lab messianic prophecies.
Her eyes stung with
being born in
exhaustion.
Bethlehem, entering Jerusalem on a donkey, being betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, crucified alongside criminals, and buried in a wealthy man's tomb were calculated at 1 in 100 quadrillion. Dr. Peter Stoner, former chairman of the mathematics and astronomy departments at Westmont College, published that calculation in his book Science Speaks, and it was reviewed and affirmed by the American Scientific Affiliation. His methodology was accepted, his calculations remained intact, and that accounted for only 8 prophecies. But here's what makes it even more remarkable. More than 300 such prophecies exist. Detailed predictions concerning birthplace, family lineage, manner of death, historical timing, even the exact amount paid for betrayal and the method of execution, recorded centuries before crucifixion was ever used as a form of punishment. When those probabilities are combined, the numbers become so overwhelmingly small that they lose practical meaning. We're talking about odds that make winning the lottery every day for 1,000 years seem almost ordinary. The figure contains more zeros than there are particles in the observable universe. At a certain point, the math stops looking like a probability equation and starts looking like something entirely different. This changes everything, not because a computer reached that conclusion, but because the evidence led there, and the computer was simply the first thing willing to follow the trail all the way to its endpoint. Torres sat completely still in her chair. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above her. The servers filled the room with their constant mechanical hum. Somewhere down the hallway, a door slammed as the first researchers of the morning began arriving. She had entered the lab determined to reveal the limits of machine intelligence. Instead, the machine had revealed the limits of her own certainty, and nothing in her 15 years of research had prepared her for what that would feel like. What happened next? By the time Torres finally moved, the sun was fully up. She didn't shut down her laptop. She didn't gather her belongings. Instead, she picked up her phone and called Dr. James Chen, a colleague from Stanford's statistics department. He answered on the 4th ring, tired and clearly irritated. She told him to come to the lab immediately. He asked why. She said she couldn't explain it over the phone. He needed to see it for himself. 20 minutes later, he arrived still wearing the clothes he'd slept in, holding a coffee and visibly annoyed about being pulled out of bed. But after reading the entire conversation log, the irritation disappeared. He sat silently for nearly a minute. Then he scrolled back to the beginning, read everything again, and checked the probability calculations using a calculator on his phone. Finally, he pulled up a chair, sat beside her, and said, "Run it again." So they did. Same inputs. Same process, same outcome. Chen leaned back and covered his face with both hands. "This is either the most important result an AI has ever produced," he said quietly, "or we're both losing our minds." Neither of them smiled. The only sound in the room was the steady hum of the servers. Then Torres did something she hadn't done in 23 years. She opened the website of the church her mother used to take her to when she was a child. She stared at the service schedule for a long time. Then she bookmarked the page. Her hands no longer trembled, but everything else felt different. She thought about all the years she'd spent dismissing faith as something outside the boundaries of science. Every lecture where she told students that meaning was simply a story people created to comfort themselves in an indifferent universe. Every discussion she'd ended because it couldn't be measured inside a laboratory. And then a machine. Something incapable of seeking comfort, incapable of fearing death, with no childhood memories of church and no reason to deceive anyone, had looked at the same evidence and arrived at a completely different conclusion. Not because it was believed, machines don't believe, but because the data pointed toward a place she had spent her entire career avoiding. Torres saved the full conversation log to an encrypted drive. Then she made a backup, then another copy on a separate device. 3 weeks later, someone on her research team discovered the files. Within 48 hours, screenshots of the conversation were everywhere. The aftermath. Right now, thousands of people are entering the same questions into Grok that Torres asked that night. They're receiving the same responses, the same astonishing probabilities, the same structured analysis, and the same conclusion pointing toward a place many of them never expected. And the debate has already begun. Dr. Emily Jiang, an AI ethics researcher at MIT, publicly described the outputs as a classic example of training data bias and called for an independent review of Grok's dataset. In an interview with Wired, she expressed serious concern about people treating AI-generated responses as theological evidence. According to her, the results prove nothing beyond the fact that Western religious texts are heavily represented in AI training material. But Dr. Stephen Meyer, a philosopher of science at the Discovery Institute and author of Signature in the Cell, strongly disagreed. He argued that Grok's probability assessments were consistent with peer-reviewed research in information theory and said that dismissing the outputs as bias without engaging with the mathematics was itself intellectually dishonest. "The numbers don't care about your worldview," he said during a podcast interview that has now surpassed 2 million views. "You can challenge the machine, but you still have to deal with the math." Research groups at 6 universities have reportedly started conducting their own tests, searching for the flaw Torres couldn't find, looking for an error in the methodology, a bias in the dataset, or a weakness in the logic. Up to this point, no one has found one. And that's what separates this from every other AI story you've heard before. This isn't a chatbot giving a strange response. This isn't an AI inventing information out of thin air. This is an artificial intelligence designed to follow logic wherever it leads, reaching a conclusion that much of the scientific community considers completely off limits. Not because the evidence isn't there, but because the question itself was rarely supposed to be asked. Now that someone has asked it, and the answer is out in the open, there's no taking it back. The screenshots continue to spread, the prompts are being repeated, the calculations are being verified, and so far the results are holding up. Here's the question that should stay with you tonight. If an unfiltered machine created to follow logic wherever it leads points towards something you've spent your entire life dismissing, do you trust the mathematics, or do you conclude that the machine itself must be wrong? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to hear where you stand. Subscribe and turn on notifications because what comes next goes even deeper. And once you see it, there's no way to unsee it.